Okay, the next structure we want to look at is we talked about the ventricles versus the atria, and in the ventricles, of course, we have the valve that separates the atria from the ventricles. We have the atrioventricular valves, and in the right side of the heart we have the tricuspid valve, and the left side of the heart we have the bicuspid or the mitral valve. Okay, now the structure-wise, one thing we want to talk about right now, we already talked about the papillary muscles, the cone-shaped muscles that have the chordae tendineae, which are tendineae, which are coming from the valves and attach the valves to the papillary muscles. But now let's look at this trabecula carne. Trabecula means lattice work, and carne means basically like carnivore, chili con carne, or incarnate. It means in flesh or in the muscle. So whereas we looked up here and we said that the pectinate muscle was the muscle of the auricles, well, the trabecula carne are the muscles of the actual ventricles, and they form a certain lattice work looking pattern. So let's look at that real quick. So looking at this, notice you can see this lattice work of muscular patterns down here in the ventricles. We can see it on both sides, and that is going to be, again, the trabecula carne, which is kind of like the patterns of the ventricles versus the pectinate muscle being the patterns in the auricles. Okay, so again, we have our right side of the heart, right atria, right ventricle. Then our next thing that we want to look at is how is blood going to get out of the right side? It came into the right side through the superior and inferior vena cava. How is it going to get out, and where's it going to go? Well, it's going to go into our pulmonary trunk here, this major blood vessel, and since the blood is going away from the heart here, then this is going to be an artery, and since this artery is taking blood to the lungs, then this is also called this pulmonary trunk leads to the pulmonary arteries. Even though you can technically call the pulmonary trunk, you can call it a pulmonary artery, but if we want to break it down a little bit further, we can say the pulmonary trunk branches into left and right pulmonary arteries, and they're going to take the oxygen poor blood to the lungs. Okay, but before we can get from the right ventricle into the pulmonary trunk, we have to go through another valve. Now I had two atrioventricular valves here that we talked about earlier. Now I have two semilunar valves. They're at the base of these vessels, these arteries, and so the pulmonary semilunar valve is this, and sometimes called the pulmonic valve, but it is a semilunar as opposed to, notice there's no chordae tendineae coming out of these, and so it still opens up by blood pressure. When the ventricles start squeezing the blood upwards, the pressure of the blood opens them up. Once it gets past that, though, the blood cannot come back because it opens the valve from this side, but once the heart relaxes, whatever blood doesn't get out of the heart drops back down to the bottom, but whatever blood gets past that semilunar valve comes back and actually closes it from the other side. So again, what do valves do? They prevent backflow. They allow one-way flow, and then they prevent flow going opposite of the way they open. Again, now we're talking about the pulmonary circuit because we're sending blood to the lungs through the pulmonary semilunar valve into the pulmonary trunk, and then branching into our left and right pulmonary veins. Once the blood gets from the lungs, it comes back through pulmonary arteries, back on both sides, and enters into the left atrium, which also has the pectinate muscles in them. Now we already mentioned this valve here. This is the atrioventricular bicuspid valve, and of course it's a atrioventricular valve, so we can see the chordae tendineae, we can see the papillary muscles that it attaches to, we can see the trabecula carne in this left ventricle area here. And another thing I want you to notice is that the left ventricle is much thicker. Look at the thickness here versus the right ventricle. And if you think about it, this only has to squeeze blood to the lungs, whereas this has to squeeze blood to the systemic arteries. So this has to squeeze blood to the rest of your body. So this is much more muscular through here to put more pressure on the blood to go to the rest of your body. Now, the other thing is when the blood leaves the ventricle, then it has to go through this aortic semilunar valve that looks like this one, but it's at the base of the aorta. And then, of course, the blood goes into the aorta, we'll talk about these other branches once we talk about blood vessels. Now, the next thing I want to mention is that we have a septum here that's dividing the blood in here from the blood over here. So I've got an inter, meaning between, ventricular. So I have the septum between the ventricles, and I also have an interatrial septum, which is which is what the fossa ovale allowed blood to go through in order to go from the right atrium to the left atrium when we were in our fetal circulation, our fetal heart blood circulation. Okay, but so this separation between the chambers over here versus the chambers over here is the septum, and of course the first part of the name tells us which septum it is. It's either dividing the ventricle from the ventricle or the atria from the atria. Okay, back to our structure list. So we have basically mentioned the rest of these terms up to the term interventricular septum, and even though atrial septum isn't there, I still want you to kind of be familiar with that. Now, the next area we want to talk about is the coronary circulation, which we're going to include both the blood vessels that are in the coronary circulation, and we're going to include the grooves in the heart where the blood vessels lie. So you're going to notice the term coronary sulcus, anterior interventricular sulcus, posterior interventricular sulcus, but I want you to add in the anterior interventricular sulcus, the groove is an anterior interventricular artery. In the posterior interventricular sulcus, in that groove, is a posterior interventricular artery. So you will be responsible for both the sulcus and the artery that lies in them. Next, we have the right coronary artery, left coronary artery, circumflex artery, small cardiac vein, great cardiac vein, middle cardiac vein, and coronary sinus vein, and then finally the coronary sinus vein opening. So we're going to be looking at these things. And what I will tell you about these right now is that when we hear of a blockage being in the heart, we're not blocking huge blood vessels like our superior vena cava or aorta. We're blocking these blood vessels that are literally taking blood back to the heart itself. So looking at this picture, and notice in this picture we have actually cut off the pulmonary trunk where it branches to the pulmonary arteries. We've done that so we can see what's happening behind it. Because when blood is leaving the left side of the heart to go into the aorta, and the aorta is the largest artery in the body, and its job is it's going to branch all the branches off of it back to all the rest of the heart. The very first branches that come off of it are going to be the right coronary artery and the left coronary artery. Now, the right coronary artery goes in a groove here. This groove is called the coronary sulcus, and it literally wraps all the way back behind the heart and comes around this side. And what that groove does, besides allowing the blood vessels to run in it, is this groove actually has a fibrous skeleton. Now, notice I said fibrous skeleton, which is really important because it prevents cardiac action potentials from jumping from the auricles over into the ventricles. It causes them to have to, forces them through a specific pathway that we'll be talking about in lecture when we talk about the intrinsic conducting system. Okay, but for right now though, let's look at these blood vessels. So again, we have to say the right from its right, not according to what perspective you're looking at it, but from the heart's right. So right coronary artery, which runs through the coronary sulcus around the right side of the heart. The left coronary artery comes off right behind that pulmonary trunk. And then as soon as it gets past that pulmonary trunk, it branches into two branches. Now the circumflex artery circles around the heart. I'll talk about that here again in a minute. And then the anterior interventricular artery, the name is very descriptive, anterior front. Interventricular is kind of running in a groove between the left ventricle and the right ventricle, and of course it's an artery because it's taking oxygenated blood to the heart. So it is literally part of the systemic circuit. So I have the anterior interventricular artery running through the anterior interventricular sulcus. I have the circumflex artery branching back, and these are both branches of the left coronary artery. Okay, now we're on the posterior side of the heart, the back side of the heart. Notice how the right coronary artery comes on back around and even starts branching down to the interventricular sulcus with the posterior interventricular artery running in it. And notice that the circumflex artery circles from the front back around to the back part of the heart where we have branches coming off of it. Marginal artery is a branch off of it, but it's not on your list, so I won't ask it. But all these other things are. Now going back to, if all these arteries are carrying oxygenated blood to these different parts of the heart, then we have to have veins that carry the blood back to the heart once we give off the oxygen from the blood. Well, so the veins are going to carry oxygen poor blood, but they're going to carry them back to the heart. Now, on the right side of the heart, we actually have the small cardiac vein that's bringing blood back around from the right side, the right ventricle area, and it's going to carry the blood back around through the coronary sulcus to the back of the heart. Here, the great cardiac vein, because it's actually picking up blood from the greater part of the heart, which is the left ventricle. Remember how that was actually thicker than the right ventricle, so there needs more blood, so it's got to carry more blood back, so it's the great cardiac vein. And then it kind of grows back around, kind of parallels through the coronary sinus, or coronary sulcus, even though it originally started in the anterior interventricular sulcus, the groove, but it does run into the coronary sulcus. Now, where does it go? Well, it circles back around, the great cardiac vein circles back around to this area called the coronary sinus. The small cardiac vein circles around from the right side to this coronary sinus. And then we have this middle cardiac vein that runs in the posterior interventricular sulcus next to the posterior interventricular artery. So this middle cardiac vein is also bringing blood here. And then this is not on your list, but I'll go ahead and mention it. Posterior cardiac vein is also receiving blood and sending it. Now they're sending all this blood back to this area. What's that blood going to do once it gets to this area? Well, then it's going to empty back into the right atrium. So let's look at that real quick. So when we look at the right atrium, notice we've got this little hole here, and it's the opening of the coronary sinus, so we can call it the coronary sinus vein opening. So that big vein that was collecting all that venous blood empties it back in, just like this vein is emptying it in, and this vein is emptying it in. So we literally have 3 openings into the right atrium that's bringing venous oxygen poor blood back into the right atrium. Okay, let's trace the pathway of blood through the heart. You will have to do this on a test, and probably on a test and a quiz. So let's walk our way through it. Let's start over here on the right side, but we need to understand blood is coming into the right side of the heart and the left side of the heart at the same time. So as blood's coming in here, blood's also coming in here. As blood is leaving here, blood is also leaving there. So even though we're going to trace it from this side, understand it's happening on both sides at the same time. All right, so blood comes from the superior and inferior vena cava into the right atrium. It goes through the atrioventricular tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. It goes through the aortic semilunar valve into the pulmonary trunk and then into the pulmonary arteries. From there, it goes to the lungs, where it comes back from the lungs into the pulmonary veins on both sides into the left atrium. Once blood's in the left atrium, it goes through the atrioventricular bicuspid or mitral valve into the left ventricle, and from the left ventricle, it goes to the aortic semilunar valve into the aorta. So I would expect you to be able to trace the path of blood through the heart. Last thing on here that I'll mention is that I went ahead and included a picture of the intrinsic conducting system, but I won't test you on this in lab because we will definitely be going over this in quite detail, and we'll be tested on this in lecture. But I just included it so you would have the pictures and have the relative picture with what we're looking at for the heart anatomy.